It can be said that social class is one of the key drivers of social difference and inequality that exists in Australian society. Profound social and educational inequalities exist, evident through demographics, resources, and educational outcomes. Moreover, these different social classes tend to be supported by the school system, which I'll be speaking about in a short while, and produces significant differences in educational outcomes for young people. In reality, social differences and inequality mean that we are far from having a level playing field. We are challenged as educators and members of society to recognise these inequities and the ways in which these systems might produce class disadvantage. Karl Marx proposed social classes were formed on the basis of people's relationship to labour and whether they owned capital. Thus, two distinct classes were formed, the working class and the capitalist class. Contrary to the ideas of Marx, Max Weber suggested society is made up of four classes: upper class, upper middle class, and working class. He also said that social classes are not fixed, rather determined by life chances. Weber examined how a person's life chances influence their level of educational success. Therefore, his ideas about life chances are highly significant to the growing knowledge of an education system that is fair for all young Australians today. Educational systems and processes have often had a role in reproducing social inequality, rather than overcoming it. Bernstein's ideas about the culture of power in schools addresses this very issue. Bernstein proposed that educational codes exist in schools and bring focus to the ways in which schooling produces certain expectations about the good student, about how good learning occurs. The reality is that some students won't fit this ideal, and then the question is asked, how are these students treated? Are they just pushed to the side? How accounted for are they in the school system? How would a school's token sporty pupil be idolised over, say, a Sudanese refugee who speaks very poor English? Bernstein's ideas shed light on the fate of these two very different students. Children who are more privileged under these ideals have a higher chance of succeeding within the education system due to their access to more opportunity. As a pre-service teacher, it concerns me that this divide exists in the school system. I then ask myself, how can we as teachers holistically cater for the students who have limited opportunities based on where they stand in society? Keep watching to find out. During his time in power, Gough Whitlam was a big advocate for equality in education. Whitlam's election campaign, Equality of Opportunity, changed the direction of education in Australian society. He introduced programs addressing poverty, gender inequality, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander schooling, as well as non-English speaking background. In 1972, Gough said education should be the great instrument for the promotion of equality. In 21st century education, a gap persists between the wealthiest and poorest people in Australia. The privileged children commonly populating private and Catholic schools, and the disadvantaged children with learning issues and special needs populating public schools. There is a significant gap between the highest and lowest performing students. So, where to from here? I've broken up my ideas into four main intervention strategies. Strategy 1. Stakeholders. I believe the strongest driver for change is in collaboration between stakeholders, school leaders, policymakers, and local school communities. Ongoing monitoring, specific planning, and re-evaluation of strategies needs to be regular to support the changes in the school on a community and classroom level. Without the combined power of these stakeholders mentioned, planning on both large and small scales would not be reached to its maximum potential. Strategy 2. Empowering education through productive pedagogy. There is a need for teachers to ensure that the cultures of the disadvantaged are not silenced or undervalued in educational processes. What we need to do as teachers is eliminate the one-size-fits-all approach and expand our teaching repertoire to better cater for the diversity in the classroom. A way this can be achieved is to celebrate the individualism within the group, more interaction with peers and collaboration of ideas, and learning activities suited to their interests and abilities, giving them the best possible opportunity to learn and be involved. Education can play a powerful role in enhancing life chances and in enabling upward social mobility for all students in the classroom. We as teachers must interrupt social disadvantages, giving students every possible opportunity to succeed. All students, regardless of cultural and social factors, should be given the right by teachers to show their own special talents that can contribute to society, not just the advantage. Schools and teachers are challenged to make a difference to students' learning experiences and outcomes. Teachers who are well educated on the issues of social power are able to successfully cater for these differences and create an even playing field. They'll be better equipped to recognise and interrogate the effects of inequality and make a difference to the socially predetermined future of disadvantaged students. It is my duty to be the encouraging light for these students and help them to reach their goals, helping them to aim high and overcome the challenging inequalities that are destined for them. Gender is a socially constructed category that defines what it means to be a man or a woman within a particular community at a particular time. This video will address key focus questions related to the issue of gender in Australian schools. Some of these include: in what ways does gender as a cultural construct influence the ways in which people make sense of themselves? The way gender influences social relationships of students in schools, and the inequities that exist between male and female students in secondary education. In 2015, Connell suggested a culturally dominant construct that functions as an ideal type of man in society, an idealized image of how a real man behaves. He calls this hegemonic masculinity. With its emphasis on heterosexuality, economic success, providing for one's family, being able-bodied, is an unrealistic idea that most men will never live up to. The term heteronormativity refers to the assertion that one can only be normal through conformity to a culturally endorsed heterosexual idea. Being gay, lesbian, queer, or transsexual is defiant of this social expectation, going against the grain of an idealization of a patriarchal heterosexuality. Gender relations and inequities are embedded in the school structure and cultural traditions. This is evident through two ways: the division of labour in education and relations of power among staff and students. Higher level leadership positions in schools are disproportionately held by males. In fact, 68% of secondary principal positions are held by men. Independent boys' schools are exclusively led by male headmasters. They are seen as tough and directive, strong role models for the students. They promote a masculine image of discipline and control that is seen as being essential for the academic success and appropriate character formation of the students in their charge. The second point is power relations. Although there are a lot of women who are teachers, they are consistently underrepresented at the leadership level in schools. In 2011, 58% of teachers in high schools were women, but only 31% of the nation's secondary principals were women. Can a female principal not rule with the same discipline as a male principal? Society has structured the female gender with that connotation. However, it doesn't mean it's factual. These ideas call for an intervention. Students face issues like bullying and inequalities in the school environment due to gender-based expectations. Now, schools are attempting to better equality in physical activity and team sports, where girls' teams are playing alongside boys' teams in a de-gendering approach to PDHPE. The success of this strategy is dependent on the demographic of the school and the relationship between students. Another serious issue that is far too common in schools is bullying, particularly in all-boys schools, where boys are thought to be effeminate or homosexual. At least 50% of Australian school children experience bullying at some point in their schooling life. Bullies tend to be unhappy with school and generally have low self-esteem, and bullying behaviour leads to troubling social and psychological symptoms that persist over time and often continue into adulthood. A lack of male role models? This is the moral panic, the feminization of teaching. Can female teachers not be role models? A cultural mythology exists that characterizes women, particularly young adolescent women, as emotionally complex, manipulative, feisty, and wayward, and thus in need of a firm, fathering hand. There is no hard evidence to indicate that female teachers are ineffective in educating boys. As a teacher in an all-boys Catholic school, myself, this idea attracted my attention the most. On the contrary, studies focused on teacher effectiveness have found that expert teachers are characterized by having deep content knowledge, and they are better at relating lesson content to prior lessons and student interests. So, teachers who have these attributes are effective regardless of whether they are male or female. Therefore, when the issue arises about the significant gap between male and female Year 12 completion rates, girls are outperforming boys academically, it seems unfair to attribute these outcomes to the gender of the teacher. This topic gives rise to a few focus questions. Firstly, how does Australian society respond to difference? What is the role of education in fostering diversity and building and sustaining identity? What are the main barriers to effective multicultural education, and how do these relate to the overall character and structure of Australian society? Australia is indeed a multicultural society, where assimilation is expected, whilst migrants also attempt to preserve their own cultural identity. We could say that the role of education is to induct a young person into a given culture identity. However, failure of this system leads to illiteracy, poverty, unemployment, and resentment. As we know, acceptance has not been automatic, nor has appropriate education always been forthcoming. Here are some statistics that reveal the extensive reality of multiculturalism in Australia. 40% of Australians are either migrants or have one parent who migrated to this country. Approximately 200 languages are spoken across the country, and at least in New South Wales and Victoria, around 1 in 4 students in public schools come from a language background other than English. Although being a multicultural society has its many benefits, it unfortunately causes cultural differences between groups to be significantly amplified. Some of the issues that have existed for many years and continue to exist in schools today include discrimination, racism, bullying in all forms, violence and crime, prejudice and labelling, and exposure of vulnerable individuals, including refugees and non-English speaking background students. The state government of New South Wales, as well as the federal government, have taken quite extensive measures to try and tackle the inequalities that immigrants face in Australian society. The aim is to eliminate ignorance and promote acceptance for all cultures living in Australia. State departments of education now have anti-racism policies and programs that are supposed to ensure that students and teachers operate on a basis of respect for cultural diversity, and that racist incidents are minimised and not allowed to persist, according to the Sydney Morning Herald in 2012. It is important that when refugees seek a place of belonging in Australian society, that we as a nation provide them with the best possible opportunities to access a good education. It is good to know that education and learning the English language are key focuses when refugees first arrive in Australia. The Intensive English Centre, IEC, invites students from a range of countries including Africa, the Middle East, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. The IEC partners with local health services, multicultural agencies, hospitals, and refugee health service programs, and give these people a holistic support network to allow them to comfortably assimilate into Australian culture. This is important to me as a PDHPE teacher. It is imperative that foreign students know where to access healthcare and are informed the ways in which they can better their own well-being. We can imagine it wouldn't be easy starting a brand new life with new people and a new language, so it is important they know where they can seek support when they need to. Cultural diversity is both dynamic and enriching. It allows us to be open-minded and creates an invitation to connect with other members of society. If appreciated and celebrated well, we can all benefit from the mixing of cultures in everyday life. Schools play a vital role in promoting values of respect for cultural diversity. achieving unity in diversity and the existence of shared democratic values for all Australians. Let us now have a look at some strategies that can be employed by schools and classroom teachers to successfully achieve this outcome. School curriculum needs to promote diversity and embrace cultural difference. It is the teacher's duty to make all students in the classroom feel valued, welcomed, and accepted for their uniqueness. This can be achieved through taking time to understand their background, the culture of where they come from, one-on-one conversation time, and learning their strengths and interests. The likely outcome is that these students may have interesting stories that will serve as valuable learning experiences for the rest of the class, and at the same time increase cultural awareness and respect. According to the Sydney Morning Herald in 2010, the next generation of Australians will be less effective if they cannot speak the languages and understand cultures in which they will be working. And in the words of Sir Stephen in 2005, we should be a nation of great linguists. It is also important that society move away from what has been termed a monolingual mindset. We have become a nation that are lazy with learning languages, partly based on the delusion that everyone speaks English. Australia has a population of which at least 25% speak another language at home. Connell et al. Suggests far too little is being done to nurture this store of cultural knowledge and expertise. Languages need to be valued in curriculum at the same level as maths and science are. Here is where differentiation in pedagogical practice becomes very important. The specific needs of the student must be targeted in individualized programs formulated, and possible changes to curriculum practices would have to be considered. Like the strategy spoken about in the previous segment in this presentation, collaboration between stakeholders is crucial to the growth and development of the student. Moreover, in order for teaching and learning to be fully functional in the classroom, it is imperative that teachers are educated to effectively put a stop to racism and be able to recognize when and if an intervention is needed. The main goal in schools is to prevent bullying and discrimination through the increase of acceptance and understanding. This begins with a strict zero-tolerance rule for bullying. However, the ideal approach would be to focus on preventative strategies rather than intervention when the damage is already done. Different issues may be targeted depending on the school. Thus, it is important to plan specifically to the students and the backgrounds they bring into the environment. It is also important to include the students in the planning process to ensure their understanding. There should also be an increased opportunity for interaction between peers in the curriculum. After all, multiculturalism cannot flourish in education if children do not mix with those of other cultures. Ultimately, it is the role of the classroom teacher to educate and inspire students to become more open-minded about a multicultural Australia, so that they are confident to make their own informed opinions that are not based on prejudice, but rather an open-minded, intelligible standpoint.